Well, we're getting into the steps that are really, they look easy on paper, but they're very difficult. Step 6, I've been surprised over the years how many guys I've sponsored who have been in a lot of trouble with 20, 30, 35, 40 years of sobriety, and we start to try to get them back in line with some sort of surrender to clear up the mess that they've created in their sobriety. And you think your amends from before you got sober were bad? They're worse when you're sober. Because you can't hang it on nothing. You can't say, well, I'm sorry, I was drunk. You know, it's like, I'm sorry, I was sober going to meetings every day. You know, whoa, it's like, it's worse. And so often I'll sit down with a guy and they're convinced that they need to up their involvement with step maybe 10, 11, and 12. Maybe have a couple wow, lack of power is my dilemma. You have to turn to a power greater than yourself. that will solve your problem. You want me to use this?
Just over this.
Okay. Can you hear that? I'm sorry. So we start looking into what's going on, and what we discovered is that the deficiency is really in step 6. One of the guys I sponsor, after going through all of this and trying to re-establish his sanity in sobriety, he came away from it, and he with a great saying, he referred to step 6 as the Judas step. And what he meant by that is if one of the 12 betrayed you, it was probably step 6. And the reason, and when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. We start this process, as my grand sponsor used to say, as an inside job. That with step 1, when it says we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves, that we were alcoholics. And all of this happens. It's not head knowledge. That's why academic approaches to recovery and the steps in the workbooks and haven't had that much success, because it's not an academic process, it's an experiential heart process. It has to happen in here. And step 6 is so easy to intellectually placate, but so difficult to actually do. There's an old adage in Alcoholics Anonymous that, I'm in stereo now, here, I'll give you this back. There's an old adage, a little story that people use, guys I sponsor, one of the guys I sponsor uses it a lot when he's talking about step 3. And the story is, there's 3 frogs sitting on a log, and one of them decides to jump in the water. How many are on the log now? And the answer is still 3, because he only decided. Well, if you were entirely ready to have God take these things from you, that's when you hear the splash. When you're willing to lay down all your defense mechanisms. And I think that's really what our defects of character are. They're cultivated defense mechanisms that we've used over the years to defend ourselves from a life that we're afraid is going to be boring, lonely, ungratifying, empty, insecure, threatening. I mean, when you think about it, what is anger except a defense mechanism we cultivate when we're threatened, right? And some of us, we create these defense mechanisms to the point where we can't even we don't even realize what's underneath it. I know there were years in my life where I had some years where I was violent and I'd snap quick. And it was so instantaneous that I never understood that I was afraid. I just, like that. And the real truth was, I was scared. And anger was my defense. And if what would happen to me if I became entirely ready to have God remove my anger? What would that look like? Then the next time somebody tries to punk me out, the next time somebody tries to take advantage of me, rip me off, who's going to stand up for me? Who's going to take care of me? You know, old timers will say, well, God will. I don't know. That sounds cute in an AA meeting, but I mean, you go out in the world, come on. I mean, there's some people out there that are beyond God, I suspect. And I guess it's really because I don't trust God. And what is lust except a defense mechanism against this anxiousness and a fear of having no connection in life? This defense mechanism against a life that might be boring and uneventful and ungratified and lonely. And how many of us will settle for sex when it's not really sex we're looking for? We're looking for connection. But we don't know how to do that. We're too self-involved to connect with another person because that involves a high level of other-centeredness. And we can do that for 5 minutes every year or so. I mean, it's not our self-centered people, it's not our nature to be other-centered. And yet, we yearn for that. We yearn for that. So all these, dishonesty is one of the big defense mechanisms I cultivated because I'm afraid of what you'll think of me, right? I've lied a lot in my life, but I've never lied because I'm a liar. I lie because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of confrontation. I'm afraid of consequences. I'm afraid of what you'll think of me. I'm afraid of rejection. And so all these defective, and that's why, and they really are defective. Because if you look at any one of these defects and you look at it objectively from back away from your life, looking at you, you'll see that these things that you're functioning on, if you're like me, actually make the situations worse. In the fear inventory, Wilson talks about a dynamic. He says that he's talking about fears, and he says they set in motion trains of circumstances which will bring us more misfortune we feel we did not deserve, but did not we ourselves set the ball rolling. And this is what therapists call self-fulfilling prophecies. It's like I'm afraid that you're going to reject me, so I become so focused on you and so smothering that I force you to reject me because you can't take it. And I make it happen. I make it come true. I'm so afraid that the people in this new job aren't going to like me that I get so weird around them that they eventually don't like me. Right? And I make these things come true. It's a complete failure of self-reliance. And that really is what is the core of my difficulty with step 6. And I discovered that I went first, when I was a little over 4 years sober, and I approached the steps for the first time following the procedure in the book, and I got to step 6. I didn't even see that there's a 6th step prayer on the top of page 76, and it's the last line in the first paragraph. And it says that if we still cling to something, we will not let go. Well, what does that mean? Willingness without action is fantasy, right? It's like you should be willing. You ought to be willing. You'd be better off if you're willing, but you're not willing, right? And you know how you know you're not willing? because you're not taking the actions of someone who's willing. Right? Because that's all that's real. And self-delusional people, and the book says not only we're driven by 100 forms of fear, but also self-delusion. Self-delusional people like myself, I fancy I'm willing. I fancy I'm ready. I fancy I'm this. I fancy I'm that. But watch my feet. Watch my actions. Watch how I show up, how I interact with people, and you'll see a different picture from what I'm telling you and what I even believe. I want to be that guy, but I'm not. And my life and survival depends upon me doing an honest reckoning of me. You can't change anything you deny. It won't happen. You can't bring a problem to God or your sponsor that you don't have. And so this is a really kind of a weird deal. And here, so I do this, I don't say the 6-step prayer. I had it in my head somewhere, and I think part of it was fed by that quote from Father Ed Dowling in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, where he says that step 6 separates the men from the boys. Now that sounds like an adult take charge kind of position, doesn't it? I'm going to be a man, and I'm going to wrestle my defects of character into submission, Right? It doesn't say that, but I fancied it said that. So I thought it was my job to beat back my defects of character. And whatever it was, I became a reformed fill in the blank. Like a reformed smoker who's like always going like this to the people smoking and trying to make them feel bad enough to quit, and just like looking down their nose at smokers, I'm a reformed smoker. I'm a reformed fill in the blank, right? And there's no freedom in that. Matter of fact, in the Tao it says that the chains that bind us most closely are the ones we think we have broken. And when you're a reformed fill in the blank, you're just as much a hostage to the behavior as when you were doing actively the behavior, right? Nothing's really changed. You're still a hostage. And so I went about this business of trying to willfully suppress my defects of character. And what I discovered is some of these things are so hardwired, and they've been. Now I may just be realizing that they're a problem, but if I get honest, these things have been a problem forever. I mean, they've been a problem. I could trace some of this stuff. I was that way when I was a little kid, right? In my desperate need to get my own way. I had those same defense mechanisms. That's where they got planted. And so these are not new problems. These are problems I've dressed up. I've tried to refine. I've tried to make them look more respectable. But they've been there for a long time. And so what happens is, as I willfully suppress something, it seems to gain torque. And it's almost like a slingshot effect. You're pulling it back, whoa, 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 whoa. And then when you run out of power, and lack of power really is my dilemma, that's where you act out on it. That's where you have another. And here's a great line that Bill writes. It's on page 101. And he's talking about combating alcoholism. Now, in my experience, alcoholism is what I'm up against once you take away the alcohol. See, I'm an alcoholic, and you take away the alcohol, I'm left with the ick, right? And so Wilson, in the second full paragraph, he says, in our belief, any scheme for combating alcoholism which proposes to shield the sick man from temptation is doomed to failure. And I think this is more than just whiskey. He says if the alcoholic tries to shield himself, he may succeed for a time, but he usually winds up with a bigger explosion than ever. We have tried these methods, these attempts to do the impossible have always failed. And boy, that was sure true for me. See, I really, lack of power is my dilemma. I can't, the most willful attempts at changing Bob don't really change Bob. Even though I may succeed for a time, I'll be more Bob than I've ever been later, right? And I can't do anything about that. There's a game, or sometimes you willfully suppress a defect and it comes out in a little different form. And it tricks you. Did you ever go to those arcades where the kids play the games and stuff? There's a game in the U.S. in arcades called whack-a-mole. And a mole pops up through a hole, and you hit it with this mallet, and then it pops up somewhere else. Well, like defects are like that. I hit it over. It's like some guys, he just feels horrible. He just feels horrible about himself. He's been going out with prostitutes, and he gets this terrible bottom with it. I can't do this anymore. This is terrible. So I'm never going to do that again. Next thing you know, he's watching porno till he ends up in the burn unit. It's like, just push it down over here, it pops up over there in different form. Sometimes worse. Because there's an old adage that without him, I can't. But without me, he won't. And I must inject myself into this process of receiving grace by taking the actions. And I never would have believed that step 6 is an action step, but it's actually really an action step. On first examination, it looks like kind of a thinking step or a conceding step or a realizing step, but it's really an action step. And the problems I've had with this are various. One of the problems is I delude myself into thinking I'm entirely ready to have something removed, when in truth, I'm entirely ready to have God remove the consequences of the behavior. But I'd still like to hold on to the behavior. It's like, I want to be honest, but I'd like to reserve the ability to not be if I really needed it. I mean, like, something very important came up, and if my finances were threatened or something, right? And that's not entirely ready. So I want God to remove the consequences. And I think I want him to remove everything, and I don't. In Bill's story, he's talking about the steps, the actions he took with Ebby in the hospital, which was the earlier versions of the 12 steps. There was 6, I believe, at the time. This was before Bill fleshed them out and really put some substance into them. This was the Oxford group's approach. But when he gets to talking about 6 and 7, he talks about it in a way that's different than everywhere else in AA literature. He says that he asked his maker, his creator, to remove his sins root and branch. There's an implication in there, and the implication is they got 2 parts. There's the branch, which is the consequences. That's the thing that's poking him in the eye. Get that out of here. But what is the root? Well, earlier in the book it says the root of our troubles is selfishness and self-centeredness. So what is the root of these defects? It's something to do with self. Either self-gratification, self-security, self-grandizement or self-righteousness, some self-validation. It's something that serves me, the great I am. And it's hidden. My grand sponsor, Chuck, used to say this is a process of uncovering, discovering, and then discarding. And I can't give to God something that I don't understand or I don't even know. when I was a kid, there was a television show on TV called Rescue 8. And what Rescue 8 was a show about these two paramedics that worked out of a firehouse. And they would go out on distress calls when people were in trouble. And they would try to, minister them and doctor them enough to get them to a hospital or whatever was needed. And this one particular episode, the two paramedics show up at this scene, and there's this little girl with her arm wedged into a vending machine. And their parents are there, and they're hysterical because they can't get the arm out. They've tried, it just hurts her. And of course, the paramedics very gently they can't get the girl's arm out of the machine. It's jammed up in there, and won't come out. So now the fire truck's pulling up, and the firemen are unloading like acetylene torches and saws and all kinds of stuff. They're talking about cutting the door away from the little girl, and it's just frightening her. The one paramedic's watching the whole thing, and he walks over and he kneels down next to the little girl, and he says to her quietly, he says, "Sweetheart, do you have something in your hand?" And she goes, "Uh-huh." "What do you got in your hand?" She goes, a candy bar." "Would you let go of the..." "No, it's my candy bar. It's my anger. It's my lust. It's my gambling. It's my cigarettes. It's my. She is not letting go of the candy bar. And so he doesn't know what to do. He backs away. He's pensive for a moment, and he comes back over to her. As he's coming back over, she's looking at him like, "Get away from me, you want my candy bar." And he kneels down to her. He says, "Sweetheart, I'm just here. I want to make you a promise." She says, "What?" He says, "I want to promise you two brand new candy bars if you'll let go of that crumpled one in your hand." And she says, "Really?" And he says, "I promise." And because she trusts him, she lets go of the candy bar, and her arm slides out of the vending machine. So the question is, what's your candy bar? Because we don't hold on to things because we're self-destructive. We don't hold on to things that are objectionable because we're crazy. We hold on to things because we have an illusion that they serve us. They serve self. And so they're defective defense mechanisms that really, truly, objectively cause me much more pain and much more difficulty. They give nothing and they take quite a bit. Even though some of those things maybe at one time served me. But even a broken clock's right twice a day. And maybe when I was a kid, my anger saved me from getting beat up because they thought, this guy's crazy. Maybe when I was a teenager and I couldn't get hooked up, my lust actually got me in one of my first relationships. Worked out. And 20 years later, it's not worked out, not worked out, not worked out, not worked out, not worked out. But I don't have another plan. I don't have plan B. Because plan B is God. And I'm not sure God will protect me. And I don't want to turn my sex life over to God because I have a feeling that his idea of sex life is not going to be that good. This is not good. It's not going to be a fun sex life anyway. It'd be, my God, everybody that seems to serve him the most ends up with taking vows of chastity. Jesus. And so I'm afraid and I don't trust God. That's really the bottom line. And this is, and I'm surprised over the years at how much of recovery has to do with trusting God. Dr. Bob, I have a copy of it at home, one of his prescription pads from his office, his doctor's office, and he wrote on it as a prescription, "Trust God, clean house, help others." That really is the essence of Alcoholics Anonymous, boiled down into its essence. Trust God. Easier said than done. Clean house, easier said than done. And help others, very inconvenient. So what happened to me, and it happens to a lot of people, is we wear this stuff out. How do you become entirely ready? It's when the pain and discomfort of how you are becomes greater than your fear of change. When the discomfort and pain of the way you are is overcomes your mistrust of God. It's almost like it cuts away the alternatives, because it's like, I have to get free of this or I'm not going to survive. I must change. And some of in my first 15 years probably of sobriety, some of the greatest transformations came from moments where I hit these bottoms with all kinds of little things. And you get to that place where I just can't stand me. You know what I mean? I just can't stand me. And from that is an entirely willing and entirely ready. But something happened to me, and it happens to a lot of us, those of us that throw ourselves into service and that we really get that my primary purpose is to sponsor people and help other drunks. And as the years go on, and you get into double-digit sobriety, and you're sponsoring people, you start to realize something, that you're placed inevitably in a position you may not want to be in, but you're in it, and that's just the way it is, where you are the primary example to the people you sponsor and the newer people in your groups of how to conduct your life sober. And unbeknownst to me, this started bringing me to the table with step 6 in a way that I never would have imagined. Because transformation and entirely willing and entirely ready doesn't always come from pain. It can also come from inspiration. It can come from love. And love of Alcoholics Anonymous and love of the guys I sponsor, and not wanting to be a bad example, has brought me to positions in my life where I got real serious with God about being different. Because I don't want to be a bad example. Because you may not know this, but your sponsees will do what you do. They're like children. They really are they're like little children. Sometimes you have to sit up straight. Don't take that out of your mouth. Don't touch her. Stay tight. Right? They're like little kids. You got to watch them all the time, and they'll watch you. And just like little kids, you can have impeccable language and use the F word once, and the little kid will grab that word out of the air and just use it all the time. Just use it all the time. Because sponsees have a tendency to emulate, they'll emulate your negative characteristics before they will the positive. Because the road to self-indulgence is an easier road. The road to the other road's a high road. It's a little harder to get to. It's a little more difficult, a little more inconvenient. And so I started noticing some of my sponsees were doing some of the stuff I was doing. And I was sitting in a booth one time with a bunch of guys I sponsor after a meeting in a restaurant, and there's a couple of them, and they're talking crap about other people in our group that aren't at the table, right? I mean, really trashing them, just trashing them. And I finally I got tired of hearing it. I finally said to them, stop it. Where do you get that crap from? And one of the other guys starts laughing, and he says, don't you remember last week you were talking crap about so-and-so? I thought, oh, man. I wasn't really. I was reporting accurate information. But I was busted, man. I was busted. And I don't want to be a bad example to people. In the Hebrew religion, at the Temple of Solomon, which was very revered, it had two major pillars that held the temple up. And the one pillar represented love, and the other pillar represented the law. And I think we got the exact same thing in alcoholism. You got the love of other alcoholics, provided you're serving your primary purpose, that will happen to you. And then you have the law of cause and effect. AA is very different from it's really different from a lot of religions and spiritual movements. You know, most churches and religions, if you're a sinner, you know, they try to recruit you. They want you to come in. Come on in. We're all the sinners in here. But then after you're there for a while, they kind of expect you to stop sinning. You know what I mean? I mean, it's sort of implied in the brochure, you know, right? Not in AA. We don't do that in AA. You don't think that's true. Tell the worst parts of your fifth step at some church function. See how many potlucks you're invited to after that. But in AA, we don't have that at all. Sometimes we'll go out to coffee, and people will be sitting around going, "Oh, you know what Johnny's doing? Oh, yeah, Jesus. What do you think?" "Well, I think if he lives through this, he's going to help a lot of people." Because in Alcoholics Anonymous, the worst of us has the potential to become the best of us, right? We help people we don't help people by our success and our perfection. We help people with our flawedness, with our difficulties, with our struggles. It makes us useful. And so, entirely ready is a long process for some of us. I discovered something. I was sober a long time too when I got this. When I started to get this, I started asking myself some of the right questions. And one of the questions I had to ask myself is, entirely ready. And Wilson, in the beginning, Wilson used another word. He used entirely willing, and then he switched it to entirely ready. But what would it look like? How would I sit in the world? How would I walk? What would I look like if I was entirely ready? What does entirely ready or entirely willing look like? And I thought back to my early days of sobriety. You know, I came into Alcoholics Anonymous in 78 after relapsing for over half dozen years. I had just tried to take my own life. I was at a level of hopelessness that was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. And when I got sober, I got a sponsor. I called him every day. I was going to 2-3 meetings a day some days. I had institution commitments from the very beginning. I started doing 12-step work. I started making frighteningly scary amends that I didn't want to make. I started doing everything they were asking me to do. And if you would have looked at me from a distance, you would have seen a guy whose actions were evidentiary of a willingness. Crazy, but willing. And I started thinking, that's what willingness looks like. That's what willingness looks like. A consistent and persistent effort keeping my alcoholism a serious daily piece of spiritual business through my actions. And so, is it possible that if I did that with all these problem areas of my life, that could happen in those areas? And I had some areas in my life that were they would not budge. One of them was smoking. I could not quit smoking. I tried 3 times in my first several years of sobriety. I'll tell you, it was bad. I cannot quit smoking. The best result I got was 3 weeks of miserable not smoking and going back and smoking more than ever. I had people in AA one time just offered, begging me, let me buy you a pack of cigarettes. You know, because I was so irritable. I was so uptight. I was so judgmental. It's like from the minute I quit smoking, I just had this hyper awareness of what was wrong with everybody and the need to tell them, you know, at all. It was just, I was hard to be around. It was hard to be around. And I couldn't quit. And after the third attempt, I was just really depressed. I'm back to smoking again, and I'm demoralized. I thought, I can't quit. I can't. What's going to have to happen to me? I might have to lose a lung. I knew people that had smoked all the way up until it killed them. They were on oxygen and then taking the oxygen off their nose and still smoking. Is that going to be me? Am I going to be gasping for breath at the end, or am I going to die like friends of mine with lung cancer? What's going to happen to me? I was scared, and I just felt hopeless. And I went to a conference. I was involved on a panel. I was as a DCM, a service assembly. And I was sitting in a restaurant having lunch, and in the booth next to us is some people from San Francisco, and I can't but help but overhear a conversation. And the one guy says to the other guy, he said, so when did you quit smoking? And the other guy says, I never quit, I couldn't. And the other guy says, well, I've known you for 6 years, I've never seen you smoke. Did you ever smoke? He said, oh yeah, I used to smoke over 2 packs a day. He said, so you quit? He said, no, I didn't quit. He said, well, I haven't seen you smoke. He said, well, actually, I haven't had a cigarette in 8 years. He said, so when you quit 8 years ago? He said, no, I couldn't quit. And the guy says, what are you talking about? He said, I really couldn't quit. And so I surrendered to this, and I realized I'm never going to quit smoking. I'm not going to even try. I don't have what it takes to quit smoking. He said, but I just started every day from a couple times a day for months and months, asking God for the desire not to smoke without the intention of quitting. And I'm sitting in that booth and I'm hearing this. And I'm thinking, whoa, I can't quit, but I could do that. And I started doing that. And I think it was probably close to 6 months of doing it every day. And I woke up one morning and something had happened to me. And I can't explain it, except I woke up sensing that there was something different. And I didn't light up that first cigarette. And I was afraid to believe that I was free. But I just started thanking God for the desire not to smoke. And I haven't had a cigarette since. That was 35 years ago, I guess. And it was really not difficult at all. I did the same thing with gambling, and I've done the same thing with sugar, and I've done this. Defects are funny though. You know, if you relax and you stop keeping it a piece of spiritual business and you open the door, they come back. I got free from gambling, and then when I was about 25 years sober, I guess, I sold my company, and I ended up with a lot of money, like stupid money. And my head, not the good voice of God, but when my head said to me, well, Bob, you need to invest that money. You should invest it in the stock market. The other voice said, oh, that's like gambling, isn't it? And the other voice said, no, it's investing. Well, maybe for some people it is. 6 months later, I'm on the computer 6 or 8 hours a day, you know, trading stocks, and I'm addicted to it. And I had to start the whole process again of begging God every day to take this off of me. And it took several months, and then one morning I got up, and I'd been so, it was making me so sick inside. I was playing with oh God, it's crazy. I was about $1 million on margin, which means you're betting with a whole bunch of your money and then a whole bunch of theirs, that if it goes south on you, you not only lose everything you got, you owe them $1 million. I mean, it's like crazy money. It's like nuts. And I got up one morning and I just, after praying about this for a long time, it's funny, I'd get up and I'd say those prayers and I couldn't stop myself from going to the computer. I couldn't stop myself. And after months of that, I got up and I just almost like a zombie, I went over to the computer and I just sold everything. I didn't even look to see how the market was doing. I just wanted to be free of this. I was like the rat. I don't want any more of this cheese, thank you. I want out of this trap. And I sold everything. And it happened to be a day when the market was really up a lot. I mean, it was like, but it would have been absolutely fine if it was really down and I lost a lot of money. At least I got free of it. I had to get free of it. It was killing me. The thing that brought me to the bottom with that, and it was so embarrassing, I had a sponsee call me, and I'm at the computer trading, right? And he calls me, and he's in a lot of trouble, and he's afraid he's afraid his whole life's falling apart. He's going to lose his marriage and his everything, his job even too. And he's talking to me, right? He's pouring his heart out to me on the phone. And I'm like, got the phone here, and I'm like playing on the computer. And I'm going, right? And he says, what's that noise? He could hear the keys on the computer. And it like woke me out of a daze. That's nothing. That's nothing. He says, you're trading stocks, aren't you? No, I was just looking at some things. I wasn't really, I'm lying to him, right? He said, you were trading stocks. You weren't even listening to me, were you? I said, no, I was listening. What was the last thing I said? Oh, I wasn't listening to him. And I'll tell you, I felt ashamed of myself because here's a guy that God's trusted me to help this guy. And that incident was what initiated me bringing this to the table and as a piece of spiritual business to have God take it off me. I did the same thing with gossip. And I did really well for a while. And then I'd stopped praying about it. And a little while after I stopped praying about it, I started realizing that there were some things about some people that other people really needed to know. So that they could help them, right? That's how I justify it, right? And but I'm not going to be perfect. And sometimes I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know. It's confusing to me at times. But it almost seems at times that God's going to keep stuff in you because in some bizarre way it makes you useful. Because in the 7-step prayer, I'm not asking God to remove the things that stand in the way of my happiness. I'm asking my Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. I'm not trying to become wonderful. I'm not even trying to become happy. I'm trying to become useful. That everything in Alcoholics Anonymous it is not self-serving. It's to serve God's kids. And my grandson, Chuck, was so big on this. You'd say it over and over again. It's not my business to take care of me or worry about me. That's God's business. It's my business to forget myself and help his kids. And he drilled that into me. I must have heard him over and over and over. And my sponsor has that same ethic. self-forgetting, and that I'm trying to become more useful. I'm trying to become a greater servant. Alcoholics Anonymous is the only organization on the planet that you come in a big shot and work your way up to servant. Everywhere else, it's the other way around. You come in, you sweep the floor, someday you're the manager. AA, the highest you get here is servant. The highest you get here is you're forgetting yourself. I want to talk a little bit about step 8, and then we'll take a break. And we'll come back and do step 9. Nothing terrified me more than step 8 and 9. I couldn't imagine. I would hear people say things in meetings that would just I would despair over what they said. People talking about how they paid back every single dime they ever borrowed or stole from anybody. I'd sit there and go, oh no, I wouldn't have stolen so much if I'd have known that. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, I stole as a way of life. I mean, I had these little scams I would do daily for years and years. Just nameless, faceless people. I would go steal things out of parked cars if they were unlocked. I was the kind of guy, if at the bar, if you went to the bathroom and you left change on the bar, I'll steal your change, drink your drink, and then move to a different part of the bar, right? I mean, I did that a lot. I did this thing with every day, sometimes twice a day, with cigarette machines. Because I was unruly looking. I had long hair, and I was looked like a bum, kind of, long beard. I think I was hoping to be a ZZ Top tryout or something. And I'd go into restaurants and gas stations and bars, and I'd go up to the cigarette machine, and when no one's looking, I'd pretend like I'd put money in there, and then I'd start yelling and banging on the machine and yelling at the time, this machine's ripped me off, and I'd just make such a commotion. The manager'd come over, and just to get rid of me, open the machine and give me a pack of cigarettes. Sometimes they'd give me 2 and just say, don't ever come back, right? And I did that every day, right? And, I borrowed so much. I owed my parents so much money. Oh, it was staggering. It was staggering. I remember sitting in a meeting, I was brand new, and I just thought, I'm having a hard time getting a job, and the only jobs I can seem to get are these minimum wage jobs. And the minimum wage back in the 70s in the U.S. was $3 and something an hour, It's pathetic. These minimum wage jobs. I'm living in a recovery house because I can't afford an apartment. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, if I had a really good job and I worked for 50 years and used every dime I made, I don't think I could pay back all the stuff I've stolen and all the money I owed. It seemed overwhelming to me. I felt like I should just leave AA. And my sponsor, I get out on the ledge like that. My sponsor always talked me off the ledge. Well, you're not there yet. And a way will be shown. He used to say that, a way will be shown. I don't know. He just keep going to meetings, keep trying to help people, just keep doing AA. And I just kept doing it. And to my amazement, by the time I got into some of the amends, a way had been shown. There's a funny thing in Alcoholics Anonymous that the impossible here just takes a little bit longer, that's all. I've watched people make amends that were unbelievable. To abused children. I've watched people make amends. I've watched guys make amends to fathers who were raging, angry, violent, alcoholic parents who beat their kids every day. And the kid made the amends to the dad. And it broke the dad open. And he finally faced everything he did and broke down. Started begging for the kids' forgiveness. I've seen some amazing stuff here. But my fear is not unusual. In a peculiar sense, Alcoholics Anonymous was founded on one man's eighth step. May 10th, 1935, Bill Wilson, afraid for his own sobriety, sought out Dr. Bob Smith. Dr. Bob Smith did not ask for help. He had been drunk on Mother's Day, and Anne, his wife, he felt guilty, and so he conceded to go listen to this lecture from some guy from New York about alcoholism. He didn't want to go. His son was a really good friend of mine. His son drove him. He drove Bob and Ann to meet Bill at the Cyberlin Gatehouse. He stayed in my house for a week. He sat in my living room, told a whole bunch of us the story about how his dad didn't want to go. And he said, but please, he's begging his wife, don't make me sit with this guy more than about 15 minutes. My nerves are bad. I don't think I can handle it. It's like he did not want to do this. And he goes into the library at the Gatehouse and came out many hours later. And he came out and he had his arm around Bill, and he's telling Ann and Bob Jr., he said, this guy knows what he's talking about. Because Bill Wilson never once tried to tell Bob about Bob's drinking. Bill Wilson told Bob about Bill Wilson's drinking. And that connection was made. And they stayed. Well, it was funny because Bill didn't have enough money to pay his hotel bill or get back to New York. So I just imagine, I think it's funny when Bob said, why don't you stay at our house for a while? And I guess Bill said, well, if you insist. Right? He had nowhere to go, right? It was like beautiful. And he stayed at Ardmore Street, which if you ever get back to Ohio, Akron's a great place to visit. I'm on the board for the nonprofit foundation that maintains Dr. Bob's house as a historical site. It's a beautiful experience. They stayed there, and Bob wanted to go to this medical convention in Atlantic City, this AMA convention, because he'd been there the year before, just drunk out of his mind. He made a fool out of himself, and he just wanted to go back and show everybody he was sober. He was proud to be sober. And Wilson doesn't have any experience as a sponsor. Now, in today's world, you'd say, what, are you out of your mind? You would tell the guy not to go. Well, he didn't know that. He had no experience with relapse and people. So he let him go, and of course, Bob got drunk. And before, in the weeks before Bob left, they had been doing some work. And Wilson tried to present everything to Bob that had been presented to him. And one of the things was to go and seek out everybody that you owed money to, everybody that you had hurt, you disappointed, and clear the separation between you and that person so you can get free. And Bob, it was the one thing he refused to do. He was in for everything else. He was in for the spirituality, he was in for the confession of shortcomings, the helping other people, the meditation. He's in for all of it, but he would not go and make those amends. He said to Bill, he said, you don't understand, I've been a doctor in this community, and it's embarrassing. Let's let bygones be bygones. And I want to be a better guy, but I don't want to face it. I can't face any of that stuff. And consequently, he got drunk at the medical convention in Atlantic City, and he came back on what at one time was believed to be June 10th. Now they think it's June 17th because they discovered the records of the AMA conventions, and it was actually a little later than they thought. Then they said, but nobody wrote down stuff in the history of AA, And Bob comes back. He's so He's so drunk. I identify with the way Bob drinks. Bob would not, if he's conscious, he ain't done drinking. You know, I'm that kind of guy. I am that guy. And he's so drunk, he's comatose on the train. They can't, he's passed out. And so the conductor and another guy, they lift him off the train and set him on the platform in Cayuga Falls right outside of Akron. And then somebody calls up his office manager, who was one of the first great untreated Al-Anons. And she came running down there to rescue him, as she always did. And they got him back, eventually got him back to Ardmore Street. They put him to bed, and he was out of it. He was just a mess. And he wakes up early in the morning, and he's, you know how you come off a bad drunk and you wake up and you don't remember what happened. It's terrible. And he says, and Bill's there. Bill and Ann are there, sitting there. And he says to him, "What day is it?" And they tell him, and he goes, "Oh, no, it can't be, not today. I have to perform this surgery this morning, and I can't postpone it. We've postponed it several times already. I have to do this surgery. And look at me. My hands are shaking." And Bill doesn't know what to do. So Bill gives him a beer, gives him some alcohol and a sedative, and shoves him into the surgery room. Imagine being that patient. Oh, we should build a statue of him somewhere. I mean, Jesus, he might have been the first AA martyr. I mean, imagine laying there waiting for your surgeon to come in. And he's smelling a beer and his hands are shaking. Oh my God! And I have some friends who are archivists and historians who have searched the the St. Thomas Hospital and Akron City Hospital records trying to find information about this guy, like what happened, because we don't know. All it says in AA literature is he lived. But Dr. Bob was a proctologist. Like, did he whistle when he walked? We don't know. I mean, we don't know what happened to the guy except he lived. And that surgery was over. It was a quick little cancer surgery. It was over still in the late morning, and he disappeared. He didn't come home. And Bill was very apprehensive about that. And he was afraid that, I gave him some beer. I shouldn't have done it. Probably set that craving off. And he's probably gone on a terrible tear. And Ann and Bill are sitting there just worrying about Bob. And Bob didn't come home that morning, that afternoon, even that evening. His son said it was more, he believed it was closer to midnight when Bob finally came home. And he hadn't been drinking. And he was clear-eyed. And he looked different. And he was excited and enthusiastic because he'd spent the whole late morning, afternoon, and early evening searching out everyone he had been afraid to face and to make those amends. And consequently, Dr. Bob Smith never took another drink again the rest of his natural life. And he lived for about 15 more years. And in those 15 years, the estimates are low estimates that he personally helped over 5,000 alcoholics. And those 5,000 alcoholics were not only helped, and not only was their lives transformed, but they were instilled with an ethic of the importance of helping other alcoholics, because that Dr. Bob was one of the greatest 12-steppers that we ever had. He worked with a lot of people. And those people help people, who help people, who help people. And I would venture to guess that we sit here in relative freedom because of one man finally becoming willing to go to any lengths. That's a line in AA that's become bastardized over the years. People, I've been to meetings where the subject will be willing to go to any lengths, and people will comment on it as if willing to go to any lengths means willing to try not to drink and go to meetings. Well, if you look in the book, in the context where it uses that term 3 times, once in how it works, and twice in the section on step 8 and 9. reminding ourselves that we would go to any lengths for victory. It says, it's in the 8th step, reminding ourselves that we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. It says it again in a little further in that same section on step 9. When they're referring to Dr. Bob's finally willing to go to any lengths. They're not talking about going to meetings. Going to meetings are great. Going to meetings are important. But it's a far cry from being willing to go to any lengths. I have a dear friend who he says, I love what he says. He always talks to the new people, and he says to them, I hope you're willing to be divinely inconvenienced here. And selfish, self-serving, self-absorbed, obsessively self-concerned people, we don't like to be inconvenienced. Because selfish people only care about how they feel. And Alcoholics Anonymous is really a set of contrary actions. Actions that I take that are often against the way I feel. That I don't, I mean, who in AA is excited to pay back the money? I mean, nobody. I mean, who in AA is excited to give up a fund to go help somebody? Who in AA is excited to do to write an inventory? I get to write an inventory. Oh, I'm so excited. This is so great. It's very inconvenient.